On the High Holy Days, we gather in our largest numbers so that we might attempt to answer a series of questions, specifically, who are we, who will we be, and how will we be remembered? On this Rosh Hashanah Eve, we take up the first question, who are we? Permit me to begin answering this question in classic Jewish fashion by asking another question. Since it is the new year, I ask, what does Rosh Hashanah celebrate? Most are thinking the birthday or creation of the world, and you would be right. But specifically, which day of creation? The rabbis taught that Rosh Hashanah celebrates actually the sixth day of creation, because on the sixth day of creation, human beings were created. Now, this is a significant teaching, because if Rosh Hashanah is the day on which human beings were created, we could do worse than to begin our year by pausing long enough to consider who we are and what it means to be a human being. Let us take a moment to recall the way in which the Torah, in a portion we shall share tomorrow morning, teaches we were all created. Our classic biblical text tells us that we are formed from the clay of the earth, but our rabbinic texts, rather, do one better than the Bible, and they describe our shared origins variously as dirt or dust, earth and clay, ashes, flesh and blood, maggots and worms, and the coup de grace, a putrid drop. Our origins are a putrid drop, and our origins are dust, and to dust we shall return. But that's not all. That's not nearly all. Yes, every human body comes from the same dust and clay of the earth, and we all share the same experience of living within our bodies. But we are more than flesh and blood. We are also, every religious tradition and every religious text says so, we are more than mere matter and stuff. We are also, does anyone remember the term? B'Tselem Elohim. We are also in the image of God. Beyond our bodies, we have also been created and are animated with a soul, a spirit, a conscience, our very essence. B'Tselem Elohim, our internal reflection of divinity. And this is true for each and every one of us. No matter how much we might like to imagine that we are dissimilar from those other people, or for the one who looks like this or behaves like that, who hold views that can most charitably be described as diametrically opposed to our own. I'm thinking also of the folks who behave in all those kinds of ways that you and I know are simply wrong. As much as we might like to imagine that we are distinct and different, especially from those people who seem as far from us as any person alive we might be able to imagine. These fellow world citizens, our neighbors, our collaborators, our erstwhile adversaries, our family members, our partners, our friends, every last person we know is, as are you and I, B'Tselem Elohim. The term B'Tselem Elohim is the name for the revolutionary idea Judaism introduced to the world. It is what I consider the masterstroke of creation, the idea that each and every person on the planet was fashioned in the image of a unique, infinite, and dynamic God. So it is that on our very best days, we who are fragile earthen vessels may find that, in spite of our earthy physicality, we are also infused with the potential and the eternality of heaven. And every person who has, is, or will ever live is him or herself, just as we each are ourselves, ever-changing reflections of life's ultimate source and potential. Do you remember the name Abraham Joshua Heschel? He is the great 20th century philosopher who marched with Martin Luther King. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that graven images and idolatry are prohibited for a very interesting, perhaps even counterintuitive reason. Traditionally, we understand that making an idol is forbidden in Judaism because as God has no form, it would be inappropriate, perhaps even a sacrilege, to make an image of God. Others have suggested that creating an idol would make ourselves out to be as if we ourselves were gods. But Rabbi Heschel says something different. Rabbi Heschel says that idolatry and graven images are prohibited because God's image already exists in the world. Heschel teaches that we are each and every one of us B'Tselem Elohim, and thus we need not fashion inert objects, point to them and call them gods, for we are capable of making our lives distinct and sacred. But what does it mean for us to say this? What is Heschel trying to tell us when he says that for us to realize the fullness of what it means to be B'Tselem Elohim, we must decide to make ourselves worthy reflections of the divine? Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, who will be our scholar in residence in November, puts it this way in a midrash on the commandment most oft repeated in the Torah. There is a reason, Rabbi Salkin teaches, there is a reason that the Torah tells us no less than 36 times to love the stranger in our midst, because the stranger is our mirror. We are capable, you and I, of tremendous empathy and understanding, and we know from our real-life experiences that we are capable of putting ourselves into another person's shoes. But are we willing to see in ourselves and to recognize in one another the reflection of the self-same image in which we, each one of us, has also been created? On Rosh Hashanah, let's hope so, because the single greatest message of the Torah, taught Rabbi Heschel, the single greatest message of the Torah is to make ourselves a worthy reflection of the divine. Significantly, Judaism's concern with our ability to see ourselves in every other person and to empathize with and to learn from the experiences of people everywhere, it is this concern that commands and compels us to demonstrate our care for one another. And it will be in this way that we will repair and improve our world. Enter the High Holy Days, wherein we take note of any action, our own as well as that of our communities, our societies, that seeks bias and bigotry and discrimination to lessen the essence, to say nothing of the legal rights of another. For such acts of prejudice and injustice flow directly from a failure to see the divine image in every single and every married person, in all people, no matter our differences. How incredibly gratifying it was then, when just 10 short weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court affirmed the ideals embodied within the teaching of B'Tselem Elohim by invalidating the central provision of the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act. Just this past June 26th, the justices of the Supreme Court handed down an opinion, now known as the DOMA decision, Defense of Marriage Act, the DOMA decision, which vitiated a law that had restricted the more than 1,000 federal benefits, such as the federal tax privileges and domestic protections the federal government provides to married couples. In one fell swoop, the Supreme Court, the highest court in our land, ruled that restricting these federal benefits exclusively to heterosexual people, well, that's simply unconstitutional. Now, so simpatico with Jewish thought is the Supreme Court's DOMA decision that every significant national Jewish organization, including both the Reform and conservative movements, as well as other non-Orthodox Jewish groups, support full marriage equality for gays and lesbians. Even the Orthodox Union, which is the largest umbrella organization for Orthodox congregations, while reiterating its opposition to homosexual relationships, did so with what Rabbi Eric Yaffe, former president of the Union for Reform Judaism, described as delicacy and tact, restraint, condemning discrimination, and noting the Orthodox Union's respect for all our nation's citizens. Or, in the words of Judge Harvey Brownstone, the Canadian jurist who officiated the wedding of Edie Windsor, the lead plaintiff in the DOMA decision, and her late wife Thea, this is the same judge who was profiled in the most recent issue of Reform Judaism magazine, which you likely received at your homes, under the cover banner rainbow flag headline, Changing History. In the words of Judge Brownstone, We were all made in God's image. Thus, when we discriminate against and hurt each other, we hurt God. And that is why, whether we're gay, straight, or plaid, this issue, the issue of equality for all loving married couples with the extension of full legal privileges and protections without regard to gender or sexual orientation, this is why this issue should matter to us all. And indeed, this issue does matter, for it is both a matter of civil rights and a moral conscience, and it is also about our community's collective memory. As Rabbi Yaffe explains, our people know from long experience that where homophobia, as well as racism and misogyny, wherever these are to be found, anti-Semitism is sure soon to rear its ugly head. So, we all have a political and moral and personal interest in this issue as well. But there's even more to it than that. At the end of the day, or if you will, the beginning of a year, I proudly support the Supreme Court's DOMA decision, and I champion the American Civil Liberty Union's lawsuit against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, seeking to secure equal and legal rights for same-sex married couples and their families as are currently available to heterosexual married partners and parents. And I do so for one reason. Jewish tradition understands that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, without regard to our gender, our creed, our race, our religion, our sexual orientation, or our social status. All of that is irrelevant. Not a one of us is better than any other, nor is any individual entitled to less than he or she requires for self-sufficiency and dignity. Indeed, so great is our tradition's concern with all of humanity being fashioned in the same divine likeness, and so great is our interest in how we show our concern and care for one another, and so important to Judaism is our commitment to equal justice under the law, that from our sages we learn, failing to treat our brothers and sisters in a way that celebrates their inherent divinity, or treating a person in such a way as diminishes the image in which they were created. This, according to our tradition, is what is known as a Chilul Hashem, a desecration of the divine name. So it is that Judaism has long recognized that our living up to the full responsibility we have for realizing what it means for us to be b'tselem Elohim depends directly upon each and every one of us, no matter whatsoever the adjectives used to describe any of us, coming to understand the same truth. B'tselem Elohim means we are all created in God's image. We are all unique and equal. We are all the same under the law. No individual is entitled to less than fair and equitable treatment, including being accorded the dignity and honor, as well as the legal and financial benefits granted to all who are eligible and interested in committing themselves to creating and nurturing a loving, marital, family relationship, insofar as these benefits and privileges are available within society as a whole. The great Rabbi Akiva, whose contemporaries called him Rosh l'Chachamim, the wisest of all the sages, taught some 2,000 years ago that it is surely a blessing to have been fashioned in the divine image. It is a blessing beyond compare, and it is one not to be taken for granted. But the even greater blessing, taught Akiva, even greater than having been created b'tselem Elohim, is having been created with the awareness and the responsibility of what it means for us to be in the divine image. And so it is that as we enter the new year 5774, we have as our task recognizing in all people the unique and infinite reflection of the divine in which each of us, as well as every other single, as well as every other married person, has been created. Heeding Judaism's instructions to see in every person's experience a mirror of our own lives, our own fears, hopes, regrets, disappointments, our own dreams. To be b'tselem Elohim, and certainly to be a Jew in the year 5774 here in the United States of America, means that we are at once fully human and at the same time ever in pursuit of our higher angels and highest ideals. And so it is that tonight I call on Governor Corbett, the leaders of the Commonwealth, as well as my fellow citizens of Pennsylvania. Indeed, I call on all who hear my voice tonight in this room and through our streaming of our services this night and in coming days. I call on you to reflect with me on the extent to which any one of us might be complicit in denying any of our fellow citizens their right, their opportunity, their chance in love, at liberty, and in their pursuit of happiness. And as we enter a new year, if it be so, let us address our own failings by redressing this injustice. For in this way will we not only help to secure our own futures, so will we help to improve the lives of others, and in this way make our world and our union a more perfect place. And so too, in this way, shall we live up to the greatest blessing and responsibility we have, fashioning with our lives a sanctification of the image in which all of us were created. On this Rosh Hashanah day, in answer to the question then, who are we? Let us respond with a resounding, we are B'Tselem Elohim. We are worthy reflections of the divine. Amen. Shana Tova.